The weary rider. The wind clawed at Jedediah, a frigid hand trying to peel him from the saddle. Snow, fine as ground glass, stung his cheeks, and the world had shrunk to the immediate circle around his weary horse, Jericho. The mare's breath plumed white against the gray sky, each exhale a sigh of resignation. Even Jericho, usually unflappable, was beginning to show the strain of the relentless winter. Jedediah hunched deeper into his thick wool coat, the collar pulled high against his grizzled neck. He tasted grit on his tongue, a mix of snow and trail dust churned up by the relentless wind. He'd been riding for days, seeking nothing more than oblivion in the vast, unforgiving landscape. But oblivion, he was discovering, was a fickle mistress. His past rode with him, a phantom legion clinging to his back. He saw faces flicker in the swirling snow, the terrified eyes of a boy soldier barely old enough to shave, caught in the crossfire, the hollow stare of a farmer driven off his land by greed and violence, the accusing glare of a woman he'd failed to save. The war, it had changed him, forged him into something hard and unyielding. But beneath the hardened exterior, the embers of the man he once was still flickered, fueled by regret and a desperate longing for redemption. He'd become a gunslinger not out of choice, but out of necessity. The war had taught him to kill, and the peace that followed offered little else to a man with his talents. He drifted from town to town, hired gun and reluctant savior, leaving a trail of bodies and broken promises in his wake. Each victory felt like another nail hammered into the coffin of his soul. He coughed, a dry, rasping sound that echoed in the desolate silence. He needed shelter, needed it soon. Jericho needed it more. He scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowed against the glare. Nothing but white, a blinding, featureless expanse that seemed to stretch on forever. He almost turned back, succumbing to the despair that gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Then, a flicker. A dark smudge against the white canvas. He squinted, urging Jericho forward. It was distant, barely discernible, but it was there. A building, or what was left of one. Hope, a fragile seedling, sprouted in the frozen wasteland of his heart. As he drew closer, the smudge, he pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was frigid, heavy with the scent of mildew and decay. The interior was a single room, sparsely furnished with a broken chair, a rickety table, and a pile of straw in the corner that probably served as a bed. He saw no sign of life, only the ghosts of lives lived and lost. A tattered photograph lay face down on the table. He picked it up, his fingers brushing against the faded image. A young woman, her face framed by dark curls, smiled radiantly at the camera. A child, a boy, clung to her leg. A pang of something akin to longing pierced his heart. He carefully placed the photograph back on the table, the image seared into his memory. He turned to leave, the weight of his past pressing down on him once more. He'd find another place, another refuge from the storm. This place was too full of echoes, too full of reminders of what he'd lost, what he'd become. Then he heard it. A faint sound, almost lost in the howling wind. A voice singing. It was weak, wavering, but undeniably there. The tune was unfamiliar, a simple melody that tugged at something deep within him. It seemed to emanate from the floorboards. He knelt down, placing his ear to the cold wood. The singing was clearer now, a woman's voice, thin but strong, filled with a quiet desperation. It was coming from below, from the cellar, and with it a chilling realization he wasn't alone. A song on the wind. The wind, a biting serpent moments ago, now carried something else, a song. Faint at first, a mere thread in the tapestry of the storm, it tugged at Jedediah's attention. He reined in Jericho, his brow furrowed. The mournful notes, carried on the gale, possessed a fragile beauty that seemed out of place in this desolate landscape. He urged Jericho forward, the song growing steadily clearer. It was a woman's voice, thin and reedy, yet laced with an undeniable strength. The melody was simple, almost childlike, but the sorrow woven into each note was palpable. Jedediah felt a prickling unease, a disquiet that settled deep in his gut. As he rounded a bend in the barely visible track, the farmhouse came into view. It was a sorry sight. Paint peeled from the clapboard walls like sunburned skin. The roof sagged in places, burdened by a thick blanket of snow. Windows, dark and vacant, stared out like empty sockets. The surrounding fields, once surely cultivated, were now buried beneath an unbroken expanse of white, indistinguishable from the drifted snow piled against the house. No smoke curled from the chimney, no sign of life stirred, save for the haunting melody. The song intensified as he drew closer, revealing itself to be a lullaby, sung in a language he didn't recognize. The accent was thick, foreign, yet somehow familiar, stirring a forgotten memory he couldn't quite grasp. He dismounted Jericho a good distance from the house, letting the reins fall. The horse, accustomed to his caution, stood patiently, its breath misting in the frigid air. Jedediah removed his rifle from its scabbard, the cold steel a comforting weight in his gloved hands. He moved silently, his boots crunching softly on the snow, his senses on high alert. The air grew colder as he neared the house, the wind a constant, whispering presence. He paused by a ramshackle porch, its wooden planks rotting and ice-slick. The song was clearer now, emanating from what sounded like the back of the house. He could almost make out the words, a rhythmic cadence of vowel sounds painting pictures of a faraway land. He moved along the side of the house, keeping low, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement. A broken wagon wheel lay half-buried in the snow, a testament to a life interrupted. A child's swing, suspended from a gnarled tree branch, swayed gently in the wind, a ghost of laughter echoing in the silence. Rounding the corner, he saw it. A small, half-open cellar door, nearly hidden by a snowdrift. The song poured from the opening, a beacon in the white wasteland. He could now hear the words distinctly, a mournful tune carried on the icy breath of the storm. It spoke of loss, of longing, and of a hope that refused to be extinguished. He gripped his rifle tighter, his heart pounding in his chest. Something wasn't right. The air hung heavy with a sense of dread, a feeling that he was walking into a trap. But the song, that fragile, desperate song, wouldn't let him turn away. He had to know who was singing and why. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever he might find, and cautiously approached the cellar door, his every sense straining in the wind-whipped silence. The widow of Meadowsweet Farm. The farmhouse stood bathed in the weak afternoon sun, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. Jedediah hitched his rifle higher on his shoulder and walked towards the porch, the dry grass crunching softly under his boots. He hadn't expected a welcome, but the haunting melody from the cellar had stirred something in him, a need to understand its source. He knocked, the sound echoing in the stillness. A long moment passed before the door creaked open, revealing a woman with eyes the color of a stormy sky and hair like spun moonlight escaping its braid. Surprise flickered across her face. She wasn't what he'd pictured. Younger, somehow softer. "Can I help you?" Her voice was a low, melodic hum carrying a hint of the song he'd heard. "Ma'am," Jedediah touched the brim of his hat. "Name's Jedediah Stone. I was passin' by and heard someone singin'." A blush crept up her neck. "That would be me. I didn't realize anyone was close enough to hear. I was further off than you might think. Beautiful song." He hesitated, uncomfortable with compliments. "Familiar, too. What was it?" Her gaze dropped to her hands, clasped tightly in front of her. "It's called The Miner's Lament, an old folk song. My husband, Thomas, used to sing it." A tremor ran through her voice. "Husband?" Jedediah asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. "He's gone." She looked up, her eyes glistening, but her voice remained remarkably steady. "Mining accident nearly a year ago. Down at Blackridge. A cave-in. He never came back." Jedediah knew Blackridge. A scar on the land it had claimed more than one man over the years. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am." "Thank you." She managed a weak smile. "I'm Alara Meadowsweet. This is Meadowsweet Farm." She gestured around the yard, a small patch of faded sunflowers nodding in the breeze. He nodded. "The song, you were singin' it in the cellar." Alara's smile faded completely. I find the acoustics are better down there. And it's cooler. This heat." She trailed off, a flicker of pain in her eyes. "Singing helps, Mr. Stone. It keeps the loneliness at bay. It feels like Thomas is still here, just for a little while." The raw honesty in her voice disarmed him. He'd faced down outlaws, stared into the barrel of a shotgun without flinching. But this quiet grief felt more potent, more threatening. He wanted to say something, offer comfort, but the words felt clumsy, inadequate. He noticed the faint tremor in her hands again and the shadows under her eyes, deeper than simple exhaustion could explain. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she insisted too quickly. "Just tired. The harvest is coming, and it's hard doing it all alone." Jedediah looked past her, taking in the overgrown fields, the sagging fence. The farm was clearly struggling. "You live here alone, then?" "Yes," she said softly. "Just me. And the memories." She looked up at him, a strange mixture of vulnerability and defiance in her eyes. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Stone." but I'm quite capable of managing on my own. Jedediah sensed a wall going up, a silent plea for him to leave. He knew that look. He'd seen it in his own reflection often enough. Well, he said, shifting his weight. I should be going. Just wanted to make sure you were all right. He touched his hat again. Ma'am. He turned to leave, but something made him pause. That song, The Miner's Lament. It's a powerful one. Ilara's eyes softened, and for a moment he saw a flicker of warmth return. It is, she whispered. It is. He walked away, the image of her standing in the doorway framed by the fading sunlight etched in his mind. The melody of the song followed him, a somber echo in the vast, empty landscape. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that Ilara Metasweet was hiding something more than just grief. Trapped in ice. Snow, driven by a ruthless wind, lashed at Jedediah Stone's face as he tracked a stray heifer. The animal's errant hooves had led him far too close to Ilara Metasweet's place. Coincidence, he insisted to himself, a mantra he'd grown accustomed to repeating. The wind keened like a banshee, a sound that amplified the desolation clinging to the farm. The farmhouse, dwarfed by the storm's fury, presented a bleak face, its windows like vacant eyes. Weeks had passed since he'd last seen Ilara, not since the rumors began to circulate. Then he noticed it, the cellar hatch. Almost erased by a snowdrift, it presented a stark, rectangular void against the pristine white, a secret begrudgingly revealed. Jedediah's brow furrowed. He couldn't recall the hatch ever being visible even in the height of summer. Overgrown rose bushes, now brittle skeletons, usually cloaked it. The lost heifer faded from his mind as he crunched toward it, boots biting into the frozen ground. A subtle sound, almost unearthly, drifted on the gale. He paused, head cocked. It was singing. A fragile, mournful air, achingly familiar. Brushing snow from the warped planks, he recognized Ilara's voice, though strained, attenuated, like a spider's silk stretched to its breaking point. What in heaven's name was she doing down there? A chill deeper than the winter wind snaked up his spine. No one had mentioned seeing her recently, neither at the mercantile nor at the church. And the farm itself projected an aura of utter abandonment. He reached for the hatch, his gloved hand closing on the corroded iron ring. Frozen fast. With a violent wrench, he broke the ice's grip, the metal screaming in protest before the wind devoured the sound. Still unyielding. Ilara, he shouted, the elements swallowing his words. Ilara, are you down there? The singing ceased abruptly. Then a muffled reply cut through the silence. Jedediah? Is that you? Her voice thready, almost imperceptible. He threw his weight against the stubborn door, finally forcing it open. It groaned inward, revealing a precipitous, unlit stairwell tunneling into the earth. A gust of Arctic air blasted out, laced with the scent of damp soil and something else. A metallic tang. I'm coming down, he announced, descending into the enveloping darkness. The sight at the bottom stole the air from his lungs. The cellar wasn't merely cold. It was an ice palace. Glistening expanses coated every surface, the walls, the floor, the aging barrels lining the perimeter. Frozen solid, everything was transformed into a macabre gallery. And at the heart of it, encased in a crystalline cage, stood Ilara, shivering uncontrollably, her face haggard and pale. Her eyes reflected a blend of fear and hope. Her meager shawl offered scant protection from the brutal cold. The lower half of her figure was imprisoned within the ice, rendering her immobile. He advanced cautiously, the frozen floor crunching underfoot. Ilara, what in the world happened? Her lips trembled as she met his gaze. Jedediah, I don't know. It just happened. So fast. Her voice was a mere breath. The singing. It keeps me warm. The metallic odor was now unmistakable. Blood. A dark smear stained the ice near her feet. Kneeling, he tried to assess the situation. The ice held her fast, an unyielding barrier. He couldn't simply shatter it. How long have you been down here? His tone betrayed his rising panic. I don't know, she repeated, her eyes unfocused, drifting. A day? Maybe longer? The cold, it muddles my thoughts. Jedediah rose, his mind reeling. He had to extract her, and quickly. The cold was a relentless predator. He glanced back at the stairs, at the slim aperture of light that marked the exit from this frigid tomb. I'm going for help, he declared, forcing conviction into his voice despite the tremor in his hands. I'll be back as soon as I can. He turned, then hesitated, an unnerving thought arresting him. He faced Ilara once more, her icy prison reflecting her desperate gaze. "Ilara," he began, his voice hushed, his eyes locked on hers. "What song were you singing?" The blizzard's fury. It all happened so fast. Ilara's tremor racked her frame, and Jedediah couldn't discern if it stemmed from the cold or a haunting memory. Her teeth clicked a frantic rhythm against the words she forced out. "I just went down for potatoes." Then the door slammed. "That infernal latch sticks, you know it does." I wrestled with it, but the thing wouldn't give. And then, the chill crept in, sinuous and insistent. I felt the dampness crystallize on the walls. Faster, faster. Water was beating on the ceiling. Next thing, frozen solid, and she made a feeble gesture toward the glacial encasement of her legs. This, Jedediah swore under his breath, finally comprehending the dire situation. The ice possessed a stark beauty, a cruel artistry, reflecting the anemic light from the cellar hatch above. More than a mere glaze, it presented a substantial, pitiless barrier. He drew his revolver, the frigid steel a sharp rebuke against his bare hand. "Hang on," he urged, his tone flinty. Aiming at the ice nearest her ankles, he sought a fracture point. The gunshot reverberated through the cramped space like a thunderclap. Icy shards exploded outward, pricking his skin and hers. But the barrier endured, a network of lines spidering across its surface while the whole remained stubbornly unified. He discharged 2 more rounds, each yielding the same disheartening result. Racket, splinters, yet no substantive progress. The crystalline structure seemed to devour the impact, remaining implacable. Anger surged, and he reholstered the gun. He was squandering crucial time, draining precious ammunition. "No good," he admitted, his voice thick with defeat. "It's too damned solid. I need something stronger." As if conjured by his need, a subterranean rumble throbbed through the floor. The wind gathered momentum, a mournful keen rising in the distance. Immense, sodden flakes of snow began to filter through the opening, pirouetting like tormented souls. "A storm's coming," Jedediah warned, urgency sharpening his voice. He knew the moods of these mountains. They could turn murderous in a breath. Ilara looked to the spiraling snow, her eyes holding a dread that surpassed the numbing cold. "We have to get out," she breathed, her voice nearly swallowed by the burgeoning wind. He gripped the cellar door handle and hauled, exerting every ounce of his strength. Immovable. The frame likely buckled under the intense cold, the latch irrevocably jammed. He hammered his shoulder against the aged wood, again and again, but the barrier held fast. The wind howled, escalating to an enraged scream. The snow thickened, an obliterating curtain that devoured the dwindling daylight. Temperatures plummeted, the cellar deepening into a frigid tomb with each passing second. He tasted the frost in his lungs with each ragged inhale. He glanced back at Ilara. Her face was ashen, her lips edged with violet. The humming had ceased. He had to liberate her. Now, he retrieved his Bowie knife, a legacy from his father. He began to chop at the ice imprisoning her legs, disregarding the protests of his rapidly freezing fingers. The blade grated against the implacable surface, sending sparks arcing into the gloom. The work proved slow, excruciating, each liberated chip a hard-won victory. The blizzard rampaged outside, a white-hot fury unleashed on the world. The wind shrieked like a vengeful spirit, rattling the hatch above and forcing snow into every seam and fissure. They were isolated, abandoned, and the ice was tightening its stranglehold. Desperate measures. The front door whined open, a long, drawn-out complaint against the years of disuse. Jedediah crossed the threshold, the rowels of his spurs snagging on a warped floorboard. Sunlight, diluted by grime-coated panes, painted the air with swirling dust, illuminating a sparsely appointed space. A threadbare rug rested before a hearth long devoid of flame, a rocking chair stood frozen in a corner, and atop a small table sat a porcelain bowl, its rim marred by a chip. It was a tableau of lost time, each object whispering tales of a bygone existence. "Ilara?" "Mrs. Meadowsweet," he called, the query swallowed by the silence. Only his own echo answered. He ventured deeper, each room echoing the last in its stark simplicity. The bedroom held a narrow cot, meticulously made, and a solitary photograph on the nightstand, a youthful Ilara smiling beside a man with a resolute jaw and kind eyes. "Caleb," he recalled. "Meadowsweet. Lost in a mining disaster up near Black Ridge." Jedediah, a boy then, remembered the somber whispers that had permeated even his distant town. His search for tools near the cellar came up empty. Panic began to nibble at the edges of his resolve. He needed something, anything. Behind the house, a dilapidated lean-to served as a shed, its door dangling precariously from a single hinge. With a protesting screech, he pushed it open, the sound like a lament carried on the wind. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying timbers. Against one wall stood a collection of gardening implements, their wooden halves fractured and split. A length of rope, petrified with age, lay coiled on the dirt floor, utterly useless. Then his gaze fell upon them, an axe, its head coated with rust, and a shovel, its handle snapped in two. Caleb's tools. Jedediah's gloved hand traced the contours of the axe, feeling the cold, unyielding metal beneath the grime. This had to work. It was all he had. He hefted it, judging its weight. Heavier than anticipated, the balance skewed. Legends of Caleb surfaced in his mind. A man of considerable strength, they said. A miner who dared to delve deep into the earth in pursuit of fortune. A fortune that eluded him. Just a collapse and a widow left to mourn. The shattered shovel was worthless, yet he grabbed the remaining piece of the handle. Perhaps it could serve as a makeshift lever. He raced back to the cellar hatch, the axe feeling heavier with each stride. The singing had waned, a mere whisper against the growing gust. Snow began to descend in earnest, thick flakes obscuring the fading light. "Ilara," he yelled, his voice ragged. "I'm here. I'm coming to get you out." He lodged the axe against the seam of the door. The wood was ancient, parched, and vulnerable. He swung, the blade sinking into the timber with a dull thunk. Splintered wood erupted. Again and again he struck, each blow born of growing desperation. The wood groaned under the assault, but stubbornly held fast. Images of Caleb, entombed in the earth, the implacable weight of the mountain crushing him, flooded his mind. He pictured Ilara trapped below, the icy air slowly extinguishing her life. He swung once more, his muscles aflame in protest. He couldn't fail her. He wouldn't. The shovel's legacy. The axe bit into the ice with a dull thud, sending slivers flying. Jedediah grunted, sweat plastering his thinning hair to his forehead despite the biting wind that howled down from the peaks. Each swing was a battle against the encroaching cold, against the fear that was knotting his gut tighter with every passing moment. The ice held firm, a glassy, unforgiving tomb around Ilara. "Ilara," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Can you hear me?" A faint, warbling sound drifted up from the cellar opening, almost swallowed by the wind. It was her voice, weaker now, the melody fractured. She was still singing, but the notes were thin, fragile things, like the last leaves clinging to a frostbitten branch. Panic clawed at Jedediah's throat. The axe was too slow. He needed something more. He scrambled back from the hole, his gaze sweeping the snow-dusted yard, desperate. His eyes landed on the discarded pile of firewood he'd been meaning to stack. And leaning against it, almost forgotten, the broken shovel. The handle, splintered and worn smooth by years of use, was all that remained. The metal scoop had long since rusted through, deemed unusable and relegated to the scrap heap. But the handle. Jedediah remembered the day it broke. Jedediah himself had been using it, clearing snow after a particularly brutal blizzard. The wood had snapped with a loud crack, the force jarring his hands. Jedediah had cursed, tossed the broken shovel aside, and forgotten about it. Now, staring at it, he saw something else. A lever. A tool. A chance. He grabbed the handle, the rough would cool against his palm. A phantom ache bloomed in his shoulders. A memory of the countless hours spent shoveling snow, planting seeds, turning earth. Hours spent alongside Ilara's Jedediah. A good man gone too soon. Jedediah scrambled back to the cellar entrance. The shovel handle clutched tight in his hand. He jammed the thick end of the handle into a crack in the ice wall, angling it against a thick section that seemed to be pressing against Ilara's arm. He took a deep breath, the frigid air stinging his lungs. "Ilara, I'm going to try and pry some of this ice loose. Tell me if it hurts." Silence. Then, a whisper of sound, almost imperceptible. "Hurry!" Jedediah gritted his teeth and leaned his weight onto the shovel handle. The wood creaked ominously. He applied more pressure, his muscles straining. Nothing. He shifted his grip, searching for a better purchase, a point of leverage that wouldn't shatter the aged wood. The handle was slick with moisture. He wiped his gloved hand against his trousers, trying to get a better grip. Again, he pushed. The handle groaned, a low, mournful sound that mirrored the wind's lament. This time, something shifted. A hairline fracture appeared in the ice, spiderwebbing outwards from the point where the handle made contact. He pushed again, harder, ignoring the burning in his muscles, the fear that gnawed at him. Another crack, louder this time. A chunk of ice, the size of his fist, broke free and tumbled into the cellar with a wet thud. "Ilara? Are you all right?" Her voice, though still weak, was a little stronger. "Keep going. It's helping." Hope flickered in Jedediah's chest, a fragile flame against the encroaching darkness. He braced himself, his gaze fixed on the ice, the broken shovel handle his only weapon against the cold, unforgiving prison that held Ilara captive. The shovel's legacy, forged in years of labor and loss, might just be her salvation. Breaking the ice. The cellar door was a solid slab of oak, swollen and stubborn in its frame. Jedediah cursed under his breath, the heifer already long forgotten. The singing had stopped, replaced by a silence that felt heavier than the encroaching snow. He had to get it open. He knelt, his fingers numb despite the thick wool gloves, searching for purchase. The ice had crept up, sealing the bottom edge like a miser's kiss. He pulled the shovel from where he'd leaned it against the barn wall. The metal blade wouldn't do, it would only chip and slide. It was the handle, smooth and strong ashwood, that offered the only hope. Wedging the rounded end into the narrow gap between the door and the frozen earth, he leaned back, testing its strength. The wood groaned, a low, mournful sound that echoed the silence from below. He pushed harder, his muscles burning, the cold seeping into his bones. Nothing. He tried again, angling the handle higher, finding a new crack in the icy seal. This time he put his weight into it, bracing his legs against the slick ground. The ice protested, a brittle, cracking symphony that sent shivers down his spine. Tiny shards exploded outwards, stinging his face. Still, the door held. Fear, cold and sharp, began to gnaw at him. He pictured her down there, encased in ice, her voice fading, the song dying on her lips. He couldn't fail. He spat on his hands, gripped the shovel handle again, and threw his entire weight into the effort. This time something gave. A long, agonizing creak ripped through the air as the ice around the bottom edge shattered. The door shuddered but remained stubbornly closed. He repositioned the shovel, seeking a new point of leverage. The air grew colder, the falling snow now a swirling curtain around him. He had to be quick. He found a weakness near the latch, a place where the ice was thinner, laced with frost. He jammed the handle in, his heart pounding against his ribs. This was it. With a primal grunt, he threw his shoulder against the door, pushing with every ounce of strength he possessed. The ice gave way with a sound like a glacier calving, a deep, rumbling crack that echoed through the valley. The door swung inward, grudgingly at first, then with a sudden, violent release, slamming against the cellar wall with a resounding boom. He stumbled back, catching himself against the barn. The sudden movement sent a fresh cascade of snow tumbling from the eaves. He stared into the darkness, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "Hello," he called, his voice hoarse. A faint cough, followed by a weak, almost inaudible voice. Here, he took a tentative step inside, his eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. The air was thick with the cloying scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sharp. He could see her now, huddled in the corner, a figure shrouded in frost. Ilara Metasweet. Her face was pale, almost translucent, framed by a tangle of ice-encrusted hair. Her lips were blue, her eyes wide and unfocused. Ice clung to her shawl, forming grotesque, crystalline flowers. One arm was partially encased in a solid block of ice, reaching out towards him like a frozen plea. I thought," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought no one would come." Jedediah rushed to her side, his heart aching at the sight of her. He knelt, ignoring the biting cold that radiated from her body. "I'm here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here now." He reached out, his hand hovering over the ice that imprisoned her arm. He didn't dare touch it, afraid of causing more harm. He needed to get her out, get her warm, get her help. "Thank you," she breathed, her eyes fluttering closed. Jedediah looked around the icy cellar, the shovel still clutched in his hand. The work had just begun. Sunrise and new hope. The first rays of dawn, pale and hesitant, clawed their way through the dissipating storm clouds. The blizzard, a ravenous beast only hours before, had retreated, leaving behind a world sculpted anew in pristine white. Jedediah, his beard rimed with frost, watched Ilara sip the last of the warmed broth. The color had returned to her cheeks, a delicate bloom against the lingering pallor of her ordeal. "Better?" he asked, his voice rough but gentle. Ilara nodded, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time since he'd found her. "Much. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Stone. Jedediah, he corrected. And you've no need. Anyone would have done the same. He glanced at the roughly patched blankets he'd used to barricade the broken window, then at the meager fire sputtering in the hearth. We should see about that cellar door. The wood was warped and splintered, the hinges twisted. Working together, Jedediah using his axe and Alara guiding his hands with surprising strength, they managed to straighten the metal and coax the door back into something resembling functionality. It wouldn't keep out a determined bear, but it would keep out the wind and the casual wanderer. There, Jedediah said, wiping sweat from his brow with a gloved hand. Good as new, almost. He surveyed their handiwork with a critical eye. I reckon you'll need to reinforce it proper come spring. Alara ran a hand over the repaired section, a sense of accomplishment warming her more than the fire ever could. It'll do, she said, her voice regaining its usual lilt. It'll do just fine. The air in the small cabin, thick with the scent of wood smoke and pine needles, felt different than it had yesterday. Lighter, hopeful. The storm had forced them together, revealed their vulnerabilities, and somehow, in the sharing, they had found a measure of solace. He'd told her about chasing that stray heifer for days, his frustration mounting until he'd heard her singing, a beacon in the desolate landscape. She'd told him about her husband's passing, the loneliness that had followed, and the slow creep of despair that had led to her carelessness. Jedediah gathered his gear, his movements deliberate. He cinched the saddle tight on his horse, the leather creaking in the crisp morning air. Alara stood in the doorway watching him. The sunrise painted the snow-covered fields in hues of rose and gold, a breathtaking vista that mirrored the change within her. You're leaving then? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, his gaze meeting hers. Got to. Heifer ain't going to find herself. He managed a wry smile. And I've got a feeling she's wandered further than I thought. A flicker of disappointment crossed Alara's face, quickly masked by a grateful smile. Thank you, Jedediah, for everything. He hesitated, wanting to say something more, something meaningful, but the words caught in his throat. He settled for a simple, take care of yourself, Alara Metasweet. He mounted his horse, the animal snorting and pawing the ground, eager to be moving. As he turned to leave, the rising sun caught the silver buckle on his belt, sending a flash of light towards the cabin. He touched the brim of his hat, a silent farewell, and then urged his horse forward. He rode towards the sunrise, the vast expanse of white stretching before him. The cold air stung his lungs, but the chill didn't reach his heart. He carried with him the memory of Alara's smile, the sound of her laughter, and the shared silence that had passed between them. The weight on his soul, a burden he hadn't realized he carried, felt a little lighter now. Perhaps, he thought, even a gunslinger could find redemption in unexpected places, in the shared warmth of a fire and the quiet strength of a woman he'd only just met. The heifer could wait. He had a feeling he was tracking something far more valuable.